everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Transplant Siblings webinar. This webinar not only honors this week as National Pediatric Transplant Week, very exciting, but it's also to celebrate the start of Transplant Families 2022 Pediatric Transplant Conference. Transplant Families, they are our generous co-host today, and we are so grateful to be partnering with them on this webinar today. My name is Cunningham. I am the Executive Director for the Klug Foundation, or CKF, and I'll be introducing you to today's panelists and moderating this webinar. You'll notice that you do have a Q&A box to field questions to the panelists on your console, and we will have a brief Q&A at the end, so we encourage you to type your questions into the Q&A as they come to mind throughout the entire webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Alyssa Andrews. Alyssa was born and raised in Kansas before moving to Oklahoma City, where she currently lives with her family. Her son, BJ, is 9 years old, and her daughter, Baylor, is 6 years old. Alyssa is a small business owner and currently is working towards a degree in counseling. Alyssa has been a caregiver to Baylor, who has been a liver transplant recipient for the last 5 years. Since Baylor's transplant, Alyssa has begun advocating for transplant recipients, supporting transplant families, and bringing awareness to organ donation in her community. She has found it not only offered personal healing for her family, but has allowed them to be a part of a much larger and very loving community. Thank you, Alyssa. Next, we have Jerry Bryan. Jerry currently lives in, Kaukauna, Wisconsin. Hope I got that right. He is married with 3 daughters, 2 grandsons, and 2 step-grandsons. Jerry was 30 years old when his brother, Jim, needed a kidney. On June 23rd, 1982, Jerry donated his kidney to his brother. Jim and Jerry were exceptionally close throughout the transplant process. They have also continued to live incredible lives, advocating for organ and blood donation across the United States. Jerry continues to donate blood and platelets regularly to help save and change lives. Welcome, Jerry. Thank you. Next, we have Beth Vandermeulen. Beth is a mom of 2, wife, and occupational therapist. Currently, she and her family reside in Phoenix, Arizona. She has worked as an occupational therapist in the hospital setting for the last 13 years, primarily in ICU and with pre- and post-transplant patients. In August 2021, her son had a routine chest x-ray for a lingering cold and was told he had an enlarged cardiac silhouette. On September 1st, 2021, he was diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy and was placed on the transplant list 3 weeks later. He had just celebrated his first birthday. He remained in the hospital until he received his life-saving heart transplant on November 17th, 2021. Thanks for being here today, Beth. Next, we have Melissa McQueen, a familiar face. Melissa co-founded Transplant Families in August of 2017. After her youngest son received a heart transplant in 2009, Melissa founded Transplant Families with several fellow parents to provide a support network for families of pediatric transplant patients across the United States. After her son's heart transplant, Melissa became very involved in the pediatric transplantation field. She serves as recipient parent for OPTN and UNOS Data Advisory Committee, Pediatric Committee, and served on the subcommittee of the Patient Affairs Committee that authored What Every Parent Needs to Know. She is also on Donate Life's steering committee that initiated National Pediatric Transplant Week. These are just a few of Melissa's many accomplishments in the world of pediatric transplants. Thanks, Melissa. If you wanted to make a little introduction, because you are, co-hosting the webinar, that'd be great. So I'll let you take over.
Got to start with one glitch, right? Thanks so much for having us with you. We are just honored to be here with CKF and all the work you do for awareness. It's just a great benefit to our community. I think this is a wonderful community. We're all a grateful group, and we're glad to have all of our participants here to learn and to just share that experience because it is a greater team that we're on, and that's with our transplant team, and it's partners with them and our children's care, and to help progress it and give our kids a long, healthy life, which is what we all do this for. So thank you so much for having Transplant Families on and chartering us into the conference. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Just a little introduction about the Chris Klug Foundation. So we are a national nonprofit dedicated to eliminating the wait for those on the transplant wait list. As I mentioned, my name is Cece. I am the executive director of the foundation. Our mission is to inspire and educate people around the United States in order to increase registration for organ, eye, and tissue donation. So we really try to focus on our three tenets, which are registration, inspiration, and education. Education for mostly younger people, people who are sort of getting ready to get their driver's license. We have a curriculum that is sort of paired for elementary, middle, and high school and college age students. That we just revamped it this year, so we're super excited to be introducing it to you all today. We've had a lot of great success and great feedback with that curriculum, but really our goal is to get more people registered as organ donors across the United States. And like I said, to eliminate the wait for those waiting for a life-saving transplant today. So with that said, let's dive right into some questions. I think we have Alyssa up first. Alyssa, can you talk about how life changed for your family after Baylor's diagnosis?
Yes. So as you said, we live in Oklahoma City, and our local children's hospital does not do transplants here. So we were sent to Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. I feel like I have to give a little background, sorry, in order to answer it properly. Because we were being sent to Houston, Texas, we had made the decision to leave BJ, our son, with my parents, who my mom was retired at the time, so she was best able to just take care of BJ. Baylor's diagnosis was acute liver failure, and everything was just so sudden. She was totally healthy, and then one day she just wasn't, and her liver was done. And we had no idea what the timeline of recovery, what transplant looked like. We didn't know what transplant really meant, to be honest. And so leaving BJ and leaving him for 3 weeks until we were able to be reunited with him was a huge impact on our family. We were separated from basically everybody we knew. We were separated from BJ, and that impacted him in lots of psychological and emotional ways as well. And then post-transplant life, as many of you guys are aware, there's lots of new rules and like procedures and processes that you're supposed to follow in order to keep this organ, safe and healthy. And having BJ, who at the time was 4 and Baylor was 1.5, this meant a lot of changes for our life, mostly socially, and learning to, before COVID, socially distance ourselves from a lot of things and large gatherings. BJ loved Golden Corral, which is kind of a silly thing, but that was something that he really loved and enjoyed, and it was something that we were told we weren't supposed to be doing anymore. Eating at buffets, the germs, the risks of infection, etc., was something that we had to do without. And just some of the small things like spending time at the lake. We're not supposed to go in large bodies of water. These things all impacted our family physically, but more so it was the emotional, the stress, the anxiety, the worry that we even had as parents as far as Baylor's healing and her transplant. BJ experienced that as well in his own way and through the eyes of a 4-year-old. And we weren't there through that first, 3-week period time frame for him. And so we weren't able to witness firsthand the impact it had on him. But when we were united, then we were able to kind of peel back some of the layers of worry and anxiety that he had. I don't know how deep you want me to go in this, but
no, that's perfect. And I actually, you touched upon something that I think, we've all sort of had limitations with COVID and everything, especially in the sense that, not to do certain things and to take extra precautions. With that added layer, as you mentioned, with BJ, with the last what is it now, 3 years, 2 years with the COVID pandemic going on. How did that sort of change the dynamic between, what BJ was going through and sort of the comparison between what he had experienced before with Baylor's transplant process and journey?
So for us, we decided that virtual school was the best option. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Oklahoma and our public health system, but there basically is not one. And our schools did not shut down. We did not have mask mandates inside of our classrooms. It was just not something that we were willing to risk, not with BJ, not with Baylor. And so my kids were virtual for 2 years, and it was a struggle. BJ is a very intelligent student, and so keeping him in check and on task is not necessarily an issue for him. However, he does need to be pushed in that sense, and being virtual was just not helpful for him. And socially, normally he's a active basketball player. He plays on like a summer team, and we just weren't doing that. We weren't having practices. He was unable to see, everything that he was familiar with. And although he is really good at rolling with the punches, he has learned what that type of sacrifice is and what it looks like. And it has just pushed him to mature a little bit faster than other kids his age. But that's also influenced him, in positive ways. He is more empathetic. He is more inclusive than other kids his age. There was zero hesitation, when I asked him about getting vaccinated, or do you have any issues about wearing a mask when we do return to classrooms? And those are just some small adjustments that he did have to go through, that are a part of Baylor's journey also.
Of course. And, there's so many, being in the transplant community, you hear similar stories, from everywhere, people not being able to leave their houses, or if they didn't have the mask mandate in effect in certain places. So thank you for your input, Alyssa. I'll switch it over now to Beth. Beth, was your other child included in the transplant process? I know we sort of mentioned, your son receiving that heart transplant, and you do have another child. Was he or she included in the transplant process? Did they kind of understand emotionally sort of what was going on? And how were they included?
So I have an older son, Ellis, and then our son, Harrison, who received the transplant, was 1 at the time. So we included Ellis as much as possible, but this was all happening in the era of COVID. So obviously the setup was a little bit different. Thank goodness for technology. We used a lot of FaceTime because he wasn't able to see his brother in real life for months on end. So we even would have him FaceTime. He could see the nurses, the doctors, to feel like he knew what his brother was doing. Child life at Phoenix Children's is incredible. They were even sending home crafts for, Ellis to make, and then we'd bring him back to the hospital to decorate the room, just so that he could feel like he was doing something. Because obviously, as a sibling, like, his life had changed so dramatically. We really wanted to do whatever we could to sort of include him and make him feel like a part of it.
Definitely. No, I think that's amazing that Phoenix Transplant Center, the Pediatric Transplant Center, kind of counted in the entire family and the other children involved in the process. I think that's a really important thing for a lot of medical centers to implement. Did you feel that sort of component was important, and really sort of did it create any kind of impact for, the entire experience while going through the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the transplant process as a family?
I think it was huge for us because it was one way for us to feel connected, which is really hard when you can't physically be in the same place. So even like, you can't have visitors at the hospital. So I was at the hospital every day and felt very isolated because like no friends could visit. I'm trying to contain a 1-year-old who's hooked up to IVs 24/7. And like, you can Google as many activities for a 1-year-old as you want. It's still hard to keep them entertained. So it's just you know, we tried a lot of different things, and I think I encourage other families to do that. People can give you advice, but it may not stick for you and your family. So just keep cycling through and, you know, see what works for you guys.
No, that's excellent. And I think, like you said, it does make a huge impact involving the entire family, especially when, you know, times are so uncertain and you never know where the next step is going to take you. So thank you, Beth, for sharing that. Jerry, a question for you. You were a little older than 1 year old when your
Right.
brother needed a transplant. How do you feel, you know, as a more mature individual, you know, going through this experience, how do you feel that his diagnosis, did that change your relationship? Did that sort of change things? How did that sort of change things in your eyes in terms of your relationship with your brother?
Well, we were always close before that. I knew that he had some kind of a health problem, but I never really knew exactly what it was. And it came to the point where I have two other brothers as well, and we were asked to consider making a donation. And at that time, I really hadn't, I didn't really know a lot about donation, but at that point in time, you know, you signed your driver's license because they said you should do that, but we hadn't had a lot of conversations about organ donation per se. But we have certainly been just extremely close after that. You know, we've celebrated anniversaries. We've just been in together. We've been to the transplant games. We had the opportunity to come right there to Aspen, and when Jim received the give back award that he received, and so we've always been really close to that. We've already arranged for on our anniversary, our 40th anniversary, we're going to be at a minor league baseball stadium, and we're both going to get to throw the first pitch in. So it's kind of we continue to do a lot of things together and keep close that way.
Oh, that's so exciting. Wow, the first pitch. That'll be fun. That's a lot of fun. And so when, you know, being in sort of a bigger family with multiple siblings, what was sort of you and your siblings' initial reaction to finding out about Jim's diagnosis and realizing that, you know, oh God, you know, he's going to need a transplant?
Yeah, we all went into it with our eyes open that this is something that we wanted to do, and we all went through the process. And I received a call, and they said, "Do you want to do this?" And within 5 seconds, I said yes, because I felt this is what family needs to do. I belong to a lot of support groups for living donors and things like that, and I do understand that all the family dynamics aren't always that way. A lot of people, they don't want their families to do that kind of thing, and why would you do that? Why would you put yourself in danger and things like that? But it was never a question. In fact, my wife said when I was first asked, she said, "You're going to be the one," and I said, "Well, okay."
Oh, I like that. I mean, it really is. And there's so many, there's so much data out there about, you know, family members and how there's much more of a likelihood that family members will be living donor matches. So I think it's a really amazing sacrifice, but also a gift that you really gave to your brother. So I think that's very honorable. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing. Melissa, over to you. Was there any sort of, you know, going through the transplant process with, you know, children, multiple children, was there any sort of emotional strain or any type of, you know, jealousy or anything with sort of one child receiving more attention than the other during the transplant process, at any point during the transplant process?
Well, we had our transplant. Well, actually, Dylan had his transplant. We often say that as a family. So many years ago, it was. I guess that's like 13 years ago. So we kind of, I'll take from what Alyssa and Beth both said, because I think I can kind of empathize with their situation. When Dylan was sick, he had a cardiomyopathy, was born with an enlarged heart. And we were here in Phoenix as well. But at the time, they had not established their center here yet. So we were also in the boat where we had to travel, which made it really difficult considering I already had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old in tow. So we had this newborn, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and now we're in this position where we have to travel for care, which I know so many others are also in that position. So we were told at the time, just, hey, you're going to have to say goodbye to the other two. It's just the way it is. And I was so broken. I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss my daughter's first steps, her first words, like they're going to miss me. But luckily we were able to work it out. And my advice to everyone is, don't be afraid to lean on family. They really do want to help. Even if you, think that, oh gosh, I don't want to burden them. They really, really want to help. So we were lucky. My stepmother, who is an angel of a woman, had just retired from her teaching position and came up and lived with us full time and watched the 2 older kids, because we had 3 and under. And so it was just craziness while I waited in the hospital, and I would go back and forth. I would be in the hospital all day, and then I would go home at night and be with the other 2. And I talked to our transplant psych, and I said, I feel like I'm always feeling someone, but she said it's okay. So I kind of got off topic, but I will wind back around. I promise. There are so many things since transplant that some include the other siblings and some don't. So I'm going to brag on the ones that do. We love organizations like Make-A-Wish and Hope Kids. If you have a Hope Kids in your area, any organization that kind of includes those siblings, and they make a real effort because, as I said in the beginning, they understand that transplant journey isn't just your transplant recipient's journey, it's the whole family's journey. And so as a result, a lot of sacrifices are made for the siblings. And we've had times where we went to other events where they're like, oh, you can't help out or you can't be involved. We just want the transplant kid. And I have to say that too, I bragged on, and many more, including yours, try to include the siblings and make sure that they're honored as well, because they do sacrifice so much, and they're able in their journey just to help out. So hopefully one day I'll be as lucky to have as giving of a one of my kids. If Dylan ever needs a kidney or something, as Jerry's been, I think that's amazing. We all hope that our kids are that giving to one another. It's just, that's kind of our story in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think, having, even as, kids are growing up so young, as you mentioned, and having kids that young, sort of not understanding and not really being able to articulate it that clearly, what was sort of your experience trying to put into words that they could understand, what was going on, why you you were away, going away, and why they had to stay with other family members. How did you sort of introduce that or talk about it with your children?
Well, we also experienced, the kind of situation where when the hospital, they're trying to protect the one child, and you can't have a whole lot of visitors, especially little ones, because they get sick so often, especially in that cold and flu season. So that was really difficult for them. They didn't understand. They couldn't connect. They just, especially, with transplant, because you can't always see, there's not a boo-boo that you can see that something's wrong. So it would have to be those really visible moments when they were younger. I know that when Dylan got his feeding tube, and my daughter would go up and say, owie, owie. And we're like, oh, that's how he eats. So we taught him, we did a lot of sign language and tried to get that through the messaging and saying, we're helping him. We're all on the same team. We have these great doctors and nurses and medical staff that are helping him, and he's going to get better. We tried to relay that on their level with a lot of help from our child life people. So definitely lean on them as well. They're there to help you in that situation. I can't count the number of times where I'm like, I don't know how to explain such a complex topic to a little child. And even when they're older, there's still jealousy. Because with teens, as I'm finding out now, because I have 3 teens, it's all emotion driven. So when you just kind of stop and say, you know what, maybe I just need like 30 minutes to just focus on the sibling and just hear them, just listen. That makes a huge difference as well.
Yeah, I think taking time just to sort of step back and say, okay, what's the best way we can address the situation? I think that's super important, especially dealing with, teenagers now and also young kids. I feel like there's so much, especially with teens, like you said, the emotional aspect is so strong, and they're sort of, I wouldn't say probably not used to it now, but it's sort of like, it's like, okay, come on. It's sort of like, let's be on an equal playing field here. But obviously having that understanding now as teenagers, I'm assuming definitely helps a lot for you as well.
It really does.
Alyssa, I'll jump back to you. Did involving your child's siblings, your other children, in the transplant process help them feel more connected? And did you sort of see any changes in the other children, not going through transplant? Did you see any changes sort of develop throughout the transplant process, whether it was emotional, relational, behavioral, what have you?
So I explained a little bit earlier about how we were separated at the time of Baylor's transplant, and we were separated for 3 weeks. And when we all were able to join back together again, and after she was discharged, we stayed for a month at Ronald McDonald House outside of the hospital. And that was a huge blessing for us. That organization is amazing. And it really just allowed us to be reunited as a family again. And that's something that was our goal the whole time, is we're going to leave this as a family of 4 still. And having BJ there was good for Baylor's well-being. He helped, light a spark in her eyes when she wasn't feeling well or she was feeling down. He was always there to cheer her up, and that's what he loved to do. And he's always been her protector. He's always been super emotional and empathetic towards lots of people. And he wanted to be there for her in that way. And so when he wasn't able to be there physically, it did harm him a little bit. He had some separation anxiety type things going on after even we were back home in Oklahoma City. Anytime something would come up with her health, he always felt like, oh no, I'm going to have to go stay with grandma and grandma again. I'm going to, be separated. He had times where he would be like, well, I felt like I didn't have a family anymore. And he did have a lot of worry and anxiety tied to those few weeks that we were separated. I'm trying to remember the original part of your question.
Oh, it just no worries. Did sort of like involving, so there were times when the two of them were separated, but when they were able to come together and sort of was BJ able to sort of understand what was going on and was able to sort of empathize, or did any part of the transplant process really make them or help them feel more connected with each other?
Okay, sorry. I knew there was another part I wanted to touch on. Sorry, that's my doorbell. Yes, he flourished as like a transplant sibling. Like he is her protector. He wanted to love on her. He's very like touchy. So nurturing her was something that he was very comfortable doing, but just that level of like empathy and compassion that he had just elevated, and he was changed. Like, yes, he was a little bit hurt and I don't want to say damaged emotionally, but he did have some struggles internally. But once we were reunited and in the following months after that, we were able to work through some of those feelings, and he is impacted. He has changed, but in so many good ways.
Definitely. Of course, it's sort of like you go through all of this as a family together, and you come out stronger for it. And I think, especially as younger siblings, it just creates such a tighter bond. And that's clear from, what you've recounted today. So thank you, Alyssa, for sharing.
Yeah.
Beth, how do you balance sort of the responsibilities that come with having a child who is a transplant recipient, as well as, being a mom to a healthy a healthy child? And what's the sort of view you take on tackling those responsibilities, or sort of differentiating, I guess, between the two of them?
So what I want to ask is, how does any parent balance like all of this? Like, I feel like, I mean, I'm shocked. Like, I only have 2 kids. I'm like, how do people do this with more kids? I mean, I think it's just your own situation and how you handle it as a family. Um, we're only 5 months post-transplant, so I have really good weeks where I feel like we are doing great and I'm super mom. And then we have weeks still that are super, super hard. But we in our household talk a lot about being a team and that we're all on the same team and we're doing things together. So, that's how we really include Harrison's older brother. When Harrison, as a 1-year-old, doesn't want to take his meds, Ellis knows that if he like sings a song and does a dance, all of a sudden his brother's more interested in taking those medications, and he feels really proud that like he was able to help out. So he feels like he's a really important part of the team.
That's awesome. Sort of creating responsibilities for them as well, and as caretakers,
Yeah.
because a lot of people don't think, children, siblings of transplant recipients can be those caretakers and those figures for the recipients. And that's really amazing. I think that's an important point. How was sort of the going through everything, obviously during COVID and everything, and it being so soon post transplant? How was sort of the adjustment to, bringing Baylor home and sort of being cohesive as a family together again? But obviously things have changed quite a bit.
We were just so grateful to be able to be home, because I think for us, one of the hardest parts about transplant for most families is that you don't know when it's going to happen. So if they could have set a date on the calendar and say, okay, this date you'll get a transplant and this is what will happen, like mentally it would have been a lot easier. But we got to come home right before Christmas, so it was such a great feeling to be reunited. And we'd already done COVID quarantine. So like at this point, we already know what we're doing. And it was a beautiful time of year in Phoenix, so we could spend time outside. So I was grateful that we could just really focus on being with each other, which we hadn't been for months.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the Christmas time and that whole aspect of it probably, I'm assuming, only made it more special for you and the rest of your family. There's
Absolutely.
that sense of connectivity there. Thank you for sharing, Beth. Jerry, I wanted to circle back to you. Why do you feel it is essential to sort of bring that education about whether it's living donation or organ donation in general? Why have you sort of taken on this advocacy role with your brother, Jim, who's also the recipient, obviously, from you? Why do you both feel it is essential to sort of bring this education to the general public and to, sort of advocate for other close family members, regarding the transplant process?
Well, I think when you start, you take a look at it and you say, well, what is this donation process and how can it impact, and of course, our family, it's firsthand. We saw the difference that it could make, and back 40 years ago, there wasn't a lot of talk about living donation at that point in time, and I've even got the long scar that everybody else gets, the little 4 puncture thing, whatever they call that. But when you see the impact that it has on other people and what it can provide, my brother was told that he probably wasn't going to have any children. Well, he had 2 girls, and I think he's got 5 grandkids. I might have missed one in there, but so seeing those kind of opportunities and things like that. And, and I think back about even my own kids, when I donated, my kids were 5, 3, and 2. And, at that point, they didn't know a lot about what organ donation was, but they're a big part of it now. They truly feel like organ donation is a good thing. And my extended family, my cousins and everybody else. So I was at Grand Rapids, Michigan for the transplant games, and my oldest grandson at that time, I think he was maybe 5 at that time, probably didn't understand a lot about what was going on there. But I was in the 1,500-meter race walk, and I'm not very fast at that. But he got on the track and finished it with me and gave me my medal. And so I think it's all about just trying to help other families. You know, when I hear the stories of the other presenters there, you know, I can't imagine all the feelings that they were going through, just thinking, well, is my child even going to live, and things like that. So if we can give families and that aspect that there can be a second life out there, and you can enjoy the different things that you want to enjoy, and I just want to make that possible for everybody else. And I know Jim does, because he feels thankful to get the donation, and that's what it's all about.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that's a really important point of, you know, anyone can become an organ donation advocate or an advocate for transplant. And, you know, being a sibling, not obviously you were directly impacted by donation, but you weren't, you know, the recipient, but you still have such a close tie to it. And you can relate that to a lot of, I think, transplant recipient siblings who, you know, maybe have sort of watched it from the outskirts, but have been in the whole process firsthand and seen it all happen. So there's really an important point, I think, with advocacy. And you know, anyone can participate in the transplant games. It's coming up this July in San Diego. So I think that's a great way. It was when I first started down the road with organ donation advocacy, my first event was the transplant games in, oh gosh, where was it? I don't even remember, Salt Lake City.
Yep.
And it was my first event. Literally had just joined the CKF team and kind of thrown into it. And I was just, you know, you hear from donor family members, you hear from family members of transplant recipients, obviously transplant recipients themselves. It's very much, it just, for me, that solidified. And I don't even have a relative who's part of the transplant community. For me, it just solidified the fact that, you know, this is what I want to be doing. And, you know, it's a really special thing to join that sort of community. So thank you for sharing, Jerry. I think that's really important, the advocacy side as well. As, you know, obviously children get older, these siblings get older. If they do want to take part in sort of a cause and advocating, I think that's a really important part. So thank you.
If I could just add something, being a substitute teacher, I'm in school here. You know, I should be retired, but I'm not, and subbing. But I like to wear shirts and things like this in school and that. And I get teachers that ask me, well, what's that all about? I get some students asking me what it's all about. So it gives me an opportunity to tell the story.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, Jerry is wearing our slogan, our t-shirt, CKF, Live Life, Give Life. That's what we try to promote with our mission and our cause. So thank you, Jerry, for promoting that. And yeah, anything, you know, any person you talk to, you never know what sort of impact you make when you talk about organ donation and advocating for that. And I think, you know, speaking to younger people, as I mentioned, we do have our toolkit, our educational curriculum that we've sort of geared down towards elementary school and middle school students, which is sort of a new thing. And it is sort of difficult to talk to them about organ donation and, you know, what happens after you die. It's kind of like a morbid topic, but having that perspective of knowing a transplant recipient, seeing the result of sort of what organ donation can bring as a gift, I think is really important and a really great aspect. And what you and Jerry, what you and Jim are doing together for organ donation advocacy is, I think, crucial and really important. And we're happy to partner with you, of course. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
My last question before we turn it over to the Q&A, Melissa, we sort of touched on transplant families, your organization briefly, obviously with this amazing conference that you guys are hosting. We've been a part of it. I think it's our second year now, partnering with you guys, but maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more of, you know, how Transplant Families was started, why it was started, sort of on that advocacy point with what I was discussing with Jerry, and maybe elaborate a little bit more on the organization and what you guys do.
Absolutely. Basically, we were started in a response to us seeking support. It was myself, and then I found a few other parents when I began this journey. Facebook was really just becoming a thing, and there was a lot of chat rooms, and so there wasn't really a consistent way to have that support or messaging. So we were just starting to find each other, and we realized all of these groups that were transplant support were more geared towards adults, and we realized that our children had a much different journey on that. So they had issues at school, issues with milestones, issues with all the things that had not been really considered. So we started bringing these up. And it's great, just in conjunction and just by asking the questions, we've been amazed at how much every team has delivered. We've been probably in contact with a lot of the same groups that you have, but every group in this community that we go forward and we ask, hey, we wonder, like some of the questions that were brought up say, can my kid have children? There's a session on that on Friday, I believe. And we ask, hey, does this really traumatize them? Another session on Friday dealing with that. We've asked the questions and all the clinicians have come through just in aces. And we just want to thank them so much for that. We want to thank you and your foundation for coming through with a way to talk to our kids, like just their classmates about organ donation. A lot of them don't even know how to bridge this topic. It's super complex. And so now we have a toolkit to do that, to send with them and their siblings when their siblings want to know about it. So this is the first time we've had something like this. And to have a single place where we can all just kind of get information that we need. We can ask the questions that parents need to know is a phenomenal thing. So we're just fortunate enough to be able to provide a space for this wonderful community. And just thankful to keep answering the call and for conference. So thank you for everyone for coming out and joining us. I hope you'll stay with us through the whole conference. Look at the agenda, pick out the ones you want, and get the recordings later.
Well said, Melissa. Thank you. Yeah, so the toolkit, it's called our Toolkit for Teachers. That was sort of the original concept of it, but it's extended now. It's for students, for anybody, any age. Like I said, we have curriculums. It's all online. It's all interactive with quizzes. And I will say the elementary school curriculum focuses a little bit more on just basic anatomy, just because obviously elementary school kids don't really know, all the ins and outs of donation being, crucial organs and body parts that go into the whole process. So we're really excited to be able to share this. And we just launched this at the beginning of this month, Donate Life Month. So it's very exciting. We're really excited to sort of try it out and get some feedback. And if anyone's interested, it's also a great way, I think, to introduce siblings of recipients, younger siblings, or, high school, college-aged siblings to sort of what's going on, the reality of the situation in terms that they understand. So I think that's really where we're coming from with our toolkit, our curriculum. So that said, I'll stop talking. If anybody has any questions, I believe we're opening that up now. I'll let you guys, if anybody has any. I know we had one starred from Christina. One question we have was, have you taken your transplant siblings to therapy, or has therapy sort of been an option for any of you?
Does anyone want to go?
So
I'll
I know
go
for
ahead.
our,
No, go ahead, Beth.
For our family, we haven't. I think because we're so close to transplant. This is Harrison, by the way. This is what happens as a mom. But we haven't broached that yet. So we've just talked a lot about it ourselves, but I'd certainly be open to it in the future.
Oh my gosh. We leaned a lot on our team, I have to say. We haven't been able to get it. Psychologists are so hard to find. So I know that lots of others have that. Keep speaking up and telling the team that you have that need for a psychologist. Whenever we go in clinic, we say, hey, do you have any recommendations? Our pediatrician too, because we know it's such an important part of care.
So locally at our hospital at OU Children's, we do have access to a psychologist, and when we do have our meetings with the team, he does step in and meet with us. And the first probably 2 years, I did bring BJ along with us to her checkups, just so that he could also talk to Dr. Jacobs during the sessions. And even though BJ wasn't very transparent with him, and we didn't necessarily talk about anything super specific, he was at least able to provide BJ with, positive reinforcements or just some coaching and guidance during those short moments that BJ could remember and recall upon later. And I would definitely suggest it if you feel like your child is having lots of emotional, it doesn't have to be a lot, but if your child is having emotional issues or jealousy, and BJ was 4 at the time, so even at his age, like, there was still some emotional stuff that needed to be talked about. And a psychologist is definitely, going to therapy is definitely helpful.
And I wanted to address another question that we have along that same vein of, children's anxiety. In what ways have you sort of coped with or helped the sibling of your child who is a transplant recipient? How have you helped with their anxiety, if there is any, towards what their sibling is going through in a medical perspective?
Do you want me to go? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, please.
For us, it just looked like having a lot of one-on-one conversations. Since BJ was so young and everything was so new, we just made it a priority to have individual time with him. And in those moments, we could really break through his little walls that he had up and talk about anxiety and worry and how he can, choose to have positive or negative emotions in those moments where he is feeling jealous or anger, or just overwhelmed. And for us, that's what was huge, is just having one-on-one time, having, not having him even to see Baylor in the same room, just totally separate him from the situation and just allow him to become transparent.
I think so similar experience, but also just having, like she said, those really frank conversations. Our, transplant sibling, he's only 3, but it still came out that he was really afraid that his brother had to go back to the hospital, and where was I going to go? And so I think if you just gloss over that and don't think your young children are experiencing it, you're really missing something, because whether they show it or not, they definitely are feeling it, but they just don't always know how to verbalize it. So if you can help them with that, that's huge.
I just want to echo what everyone else has said, and just that honest conversation. They'll understand more than you think, and just definitely telling them what's happening, keeping them in the loop. It's when the communication doesn't happen is when the anxiety really kicks in.
We thank you guys for sharing. We do have some other questions here. What are some of the concrete ways that your families honor and recognize the siblings of your child who has received a transplant? It's kind of a big one, but whoever wants to chat.
Well, definitely the transplant birthday, the anniversary. So I think we all have that. We do a big cake and presents. And when my other kids actually when they all were younger, we'd give them a present too. So we'd make sure they were included and had them get a present for going on the journey with them.
Even after 40 years, we still celebrated, the transplant games. There's a 25-year club, and we get jerseys every other year. So we're looking forward to getting our 40 years. And there's another one where I've got a jersey with 82 on it. And when we celebrated the first anniversary, it was probably a goofy thing, but I gave them a can of kidney beans. So.
Oh, I love that. That's perfect. Oh, so Jerry, I did want to ask you, sort of going through all of this, obviously now being so long post-transplant, what have been some of the highlights of these, big moments, having to do with transplant? I know we mentioned the transplant games, but just if you could recall any, yeah, just hearing what everyone else has to look forward to.
Well, again, I think 40 years with a transplant, excuse me, especially when they say the kidney probably isn't going to last that long. But when we tell our story, it's like everybody's, oh my gosh. And, when I talk to some people going through the living donor process, I tell them, this is what worked for us. I can't guarantee it's going to work for you, but it gives them kind of a little hope down the line.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for sharing, Jerry. We have one question here, just going through some of these. How do you feel, this is a general question, how do you feel the transplant community can support transplant siblings further?
I think just as much as advocating as you can do, and telling the stories of of what you've gone through and what you're doing, and when I think of the three other panelists there, you've got your young children in that, and there's a story to be able to tell out there, and people should listen. People should listen to your stories.
Definitely. I think that's being able just to tell your story. And like you said, people will listen. That's something we've seen a lot with our foundation is people want to know these things. So if anybody has another response.
Definitely spreading awareness. I would agree with that too. It's great. And it empowers the whole family. So they know that they're part of that as well.
Definitely. Definitely. Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
Sorry. I would just say that I wish that BJ was a little more included, like as far as with her team meetings, post-transplant and all of that stuff. And maybe it's just because we weren't able to be together also, but they were able to give Baylor, little packet information. She was one, she couldn't understand it, but give her little packet information, or even like a doll that showed like her scar anatomy and information like that. I wish that at the time, and I know there's a lot more information out now, but I wish at our time that there was more things for him, reading curriculum, coloring books, whatever it was, like your kit that you have was available to us, because it was hard to teach him things like that. It was hard for him to understand, other than he just sees this giant scar across her belly and we have to be careful with her. That was kind of his basic knowledge at the beginning. And the more that we include transplant siblings, like what we're doing today, the more things will develop out of it. And so I think that that's great.
Definitely. Definitely. I guess we're running out of time here, but this has been an excellent conversation, and I'm so happy we were able to really talk about such a niche topic. I don't think it gets talked about that much with siblings, and especially pediatric transplant siblings going through this experience. As a child, you're constantly learning, you're constantly developing, you're constantly experiencing new things. So something as big as watching a loved one, especially a sibling, go through a transplant and such a major surgery is definitely impactful. And I think there's a lot to take away from our conversation today. So thank you all so much for joining me today. And thank you to Transplant Families for co-hosting and allowing us to come on the conference. This has really been a pleasure. I will say the last sort of thing, as I mentioned, our toolkit is our curriculum has just been launched online. It's on our website, chrisklugfoundation.org. I believe it's down below, scrolling there. So if you guys want to check it out, it's totally free, interactive, and it's for all ages. And we have different ones, obviously tailored for different age groups. But Thank you, Melissa, Alyssa, Beth, and Jerry. Thank you all so much for joining me today and sharing your stories. I really think every second counts. So thank you.